Without further ado, I will introduce our moderator, Leo Lasar, who will lead you through the event. Thank you.
What a nice crowd to be here this evening. Thanks very much for coming. First, I'd like to ask two local candidates. Is that right now? Does that help? First, I'd like to introduce you to a few local candidates. They're going to come up and speak for a couple of minutes before we get to the congressional part of the program. Once we get to the congressional part of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Then the questions will come up. I already have a stack of questions to ask. We'll have 90 seconds to be able to respond. We're going to rotate the order so everyone has an opportunity to speak first and last. And then there'll be a 2-minute closing in which they can introduce themselves. But first, let me introduce Rich Stanley and find out if he'd like to come up and just introduce himself. You need to use this mic up here. Is Rachel Burke here? Because she can come up next.
Hi, I'm Rich Stanley. I'm going to be running for a seat out in the Farmington district, wherever we end up with the redistricting process. I'm running because I think we need to restore some sanity to the State House. We need to act like adults, not act like childs, and we need to file some bills that make sense. Our local representatives, the representatives from Farmington alone, are sponsoring bills that are just out there. They want to take away our right to elect our United States Senator. They want to abolish the federal government's rights to regulate guns in New Hampshire. The local representative from Middleton that represents Farmington wants to repeal same-sex marriage. I think we need to focus on reinvesting in education, bringing jobs to Farmington. If you go to the House of Representatives website, look at the bills that have been sponsored by the local reps from Farmington. There's not one bill that deals with education or jobs, bringing jobs to Farmington, bringing jobs to this district. So that's where I'm running. I think it's very important that the public becomes educated on the candidates that are running. I think if they had known what was going to happen, we wouldn't have elected the representatives that we had elected. So I ask everybody to become educated on the representatives that you're looking to elect, and it's very important to elect Democrats to the House, elect Democrats to the Senate, and elect a Democratic government. So we need to restore sanity in Concord for the better of Farmington and for the better of the state. And that's what I'm running.
Is Jeff Ballard here? He can come up with his
Hi, I'm not Rachel Burke, but you knew that if you were paying attention. Unfortunately, Rachel is also running for the local state legislature. Farmington, in this round, should have 2 elected officials, so there may or may not be competition, but Rachel and Rich so far are there. And I just have a note that I wanted to read for Rachel. She's ill. I regret to say that I'm unable to attend this evening. I'm writing the note to inform you that I would like to declare my candidacy for state representative. I will serve you with your well-being in mind. Thank you for your consideration and time. Rachel has been a representative before, and I know is very much in favor of middle-class values and social issues, and she pushed an agenda that helped us all benefit in the legislature. So I hope you will support her, and so she hopes you will support her too. Thank you.
Jeff Ballard here. He's a candidate for state senate. Is Colin Van Ostern here? He's running for governor's council. Is there a representative from Jackie Silly from that familiar this evening?
I'm John R. White from Wolfboro. I'm here to urge a vote for Jackie Silly, declared for governor. Jackie Silly is the real deal. Born and bred in Berlin, of working class people. Her father worked at a wood mill. Her mother made shirts at a factory. They were working class people back when the Republicans even admitted that working class had dignity. Jackie was the first in her family to get an education in college. First to finish college. Went on to teach in college. Went on to run a business. She and her husband still run a business. She has legislative experience, was elected to the House, served with distinction in the Senate. Since leaving the Senate, she has kept abreast of everything in the State House. And she is an activist, writing a weekly newsletter. One of the most informative pieces of news about the legislation pending that you'll ever see anywhere. And no mention in that of her candidacy. Nonpartisan. When these days you hear from under the dome in Concord what we can't have, what we can't do, what we can't be, I hear Jackie Silly saying what we can do, what we can be. The voice of can do. The voice of leadership. She is taking no pledges. She is not shutting out anybody. She is not going to tell you what she won't do or to whom she won't listen. Everybody has her ear. In November, you get a chance to end the craziness and to put the state sled behind a new team. I see in Jackie Silly a purebred lead dog for that team. And I urge you, come November, get behind that sled, get behind that leader. Vote for Jackie Silly for governor of this state. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kim Casey. I'm a former member of the House, 4 terms. I see a lot of my fellow ex-state representatives, Larry and Bob. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the candidacy of Maggie Hassan, why I'm supporting her, and why I hope you'll consider supporting her as well. Maggie is, as you know, running for governor and was a senator. She ran in a district that was very much a swing district. So Maggie knows how to bring people together and to garner votes from both sides of the aisle, as well as independents. Maggie and I go way back, well before my political career, well before her political career. I sat on the school board for, I can't even remember how many terms. How long is hell? No, about that long. And I got to know Maggie during that time because she was very much involved in education. She has an adult son who is very much compromised by some issues and has had to work with him and the public schools. And so Maggie knows education. She worked very well with people in the State House to enact bills such as same-sex marriage, and the list is almost ridiculous. I mean, we really got a lot done in the last 4 years when we had a Democratic majority. And I think one of the major things we need to ask ourselves is what will happen if we don't have a Democratic governor in the corner office. That is a compelling reason to consider Maggie Hassan. I think she's the person that can really bring people together to win that office. We do need somebody to be in that office that can support Democratic values and yet appeal to all independents as well as Republicans and Democrats. So you have a long night. I'm not going to take any more time. There's information on the table. I hope you'll consider never want to speak after John. He's always really good.
I do want to mention that Bob Watson, County Commissioner, is here tonight. I just want to introduce him. And County Commissioner George McGlarris was going to try to make it tonight, but he did have another business connection that he had to go to. I'll ask the congressional candidates to please come on up at this time. Have a seat. Let me start by introducing people at the table. Carol Shea Porter is to my left. Andrew Hosmer, and Joanne Dowdell. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves to you.
Hi, I'm Carol Shea Porter, and I think most of you know my story, but I'll try to say it in a minute. I came from the middle class, worked my way through college, lived the life that everybody else lives in New Hampshire, and had enough of the changes in our government, where it seemed to be favoring the wealthy. We had George Bush and the tax cuts and all the issues that were alive at the time, the wars, and so I decided to run for Congress the first time, and I won. And I won with all of your help. I didn't have any money at all. It was all volunteers, and we did that. And that rerouted my belief that when we decide that we want to change our government, we can. That we don't have to fear big money, we don't have to fear big power. We speak up, put our voices together, and we can win. So I'm very proud of what we accomplished during the four years that I was there, and I'll talk about that at the end. But there was a great deal of change, and then we know what happened in the last election. And this last election has set the stage for a lot of drama in Concord and also in Washington. And we've watched the middle class split, we've watched problems with jobs, we've watched the problems that they have educating their children, and we know education is the key to prosperity. So the middle class is still being whacked. I said in 2006 that the middle class was stumbling and the poor have fallen, and that I was running for the middle class. I was running for the bottom 99% of us. I used that phrase because that phrase was cool. And I meant it then. I have spent 4 years working for the middle class, and I intend to go back and continue that job because I believe that every single American should have an opportunity to succeed in this country, to dream big and reach those dreams. I have children, I suspect you do too. I want their future to be as good as my present and my past was. And I think that's what we all wish for our country, for our families and our community. So I hope that you'll support me again, and I thank you for the past support.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Hosmer. It's a real pleasure to be here again in Farmington. Thanks for inviting me. I am a resident of Laconia, where I live with my wife and my 4 young children. I have a 10-year-old, my wife and Donna and I have a 10-year-old and 7-year-old triplets. We have been involved in our family business, which is the auto dealerships throughout central New Hampshire for the better part of the past couple of decades. I grew up in New England. My dad was a paper mill worker his whole life. After leaving the Army out of World War II, my mom was a public school teacher. I was fortunate, as the youngest of 6 kids in my family, to have parents who talked to me about the American dream, that if you worked hard, if you studied hard, America would offer you the greatest of opportunities. I grew up in a middle town where the middle class truly thrived. When the factories were going, people were making paychecks, they were putting a roof over their head and food on the table. I believe that the greatness of America has to do with a thriving middle class. I was fortunate enough to go to college after I went to law school, where I had, subsequent to that, creating a legacy. I went to work as an assistant district attorney, and I got involved in public service. I did that for about 5 years or so. Then I moved with my wife to Laconia, and that's where we've lived for the past 16 years. I decided to get into this race after having viewed Congress from afar, coming to the conclusion that it's completely dysfunctional, that it doesn't work on behalf of those who need it to work. The middle class, working families, our senior citizens. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to be here. I look forward to taking your questions and talking about my vision for our country as well as New Hampshire. Thank you.
My name is Joanne Dowdell. I live in Portsmouth, and I'm running for Congress because Washington politicians are making life hard for families here in New Hampshire. Despite 23 months of continued economic growth, people are still hurting, while the folks that put us in this situation are doing just fine. In October 2008, the economy took a nosedive, the likes of which we haven't seen since the Great Depression. At that time, I was a senior executive in the socially responsible investment business. And when the rug was pulled from underneath us, the economic rug, the rug from the economy, excuse me, I witnessed firsthand how people lost their jobs, they lost their homes, they lost their savings, and they lost their dreams. We shouldn't suffer because Wall Street bankers didn't know a bad bet when it was staring them in the face. I'm running for Congress because we need leaders with vision and creativity to solve this economic crisis. We know we can't solve this crisis by cutting and slashing our way back to prosperity, and we know that it's wrong to climb out of this economic hole on the backs of working families and the most vulnerable. But we also know that if we work together, we can build a ladder so every American can climb out. I feel that we have a real opportunity here in 2012. We can continue to elect the same politicians that are taking us backwards, or we can seek a new way forward. As I look to the opportunities that face this country and that face New Hampshire, they're many and they're vast. I see a new way forward. I look with optimism for our future, and I look forward to speaking with you about these issues. Thank you.
The first question will go to Andrew, and it's right from tonight's paper. The BRAC process has been in the news lately, and there's been a discussion that the BRAC might end up closing the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. What is your position on the BRAC in general, and would you support the Navy closing the shipyard to save money?
It's a great question. Certainly, I think one thing we can be so proud of here in New Hampshire is the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Fortunately, when they went through the last round of base closures, the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard was not closed because it's one of the best shipyards, if not the best shipyard in the country. As a congressman, I would fight night and day to make sure that the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard is not subject to the Navy's directive to close it. I think that, one, you look at the productivity in that shipyard, it's second to none. You look at the number of jobs to New Hampshire residents as well as residents of Maine associated with that shipyard. You look at the essential services that they provide for our Navy. Clearly, I think it's integral to our sound, solid defense of this country that the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard remains open. I certainly stand with our Our delegation, I know Senator McGee was speaking yesterday, talking about that she was going to fight to make sure that it was not closed. I support her 100% in that manner, and I would not want to see it closed just simply to save money. We also see an issue as to whether the last round of BRAC, we're not really quite sure how much money that saved the military. They talk about the great savings associated with it, but really, I haven't seen a preponderance of evidence or any credible evidence that says it's going to save any significant amount. And keep in mind, once that shipyard is closed, it's closed for good. Therefore, we should do everything we can to keep that open, and I will work very hard to do so.
The Naval Shipyard is a critical and vital and essential part of our economy here in New Hampshire. And there is no way that it should ever even be considered for closure. One of the things that has concerned me when you look at the leadership in Congress, this should be a line item on the budget. It should be part of the budget. It should not be a question mark on whether or not we're going to keep the shipyard open. I agree that it's the most productive and probably the best shipyard in the country, but it's also essential to the growth and continuing success of our economy here in New Hampshire, and we must keep it open, and I would fight to do that as well.
Well, I worked very hard to get money for the shipyard for the main reason that it's essential for our national security. Now, we do have the greatest workers, and we know that's true because you're always sending work or sending our workers to other places, but it is essential for national security. We are now, and we voted for this, I voted for this, building 2 subs a year, and the reason for that is because China has really stepped up their building of nuclear subs. And so we can't simply just cede the seas to China or to Russia. So for national defense purposes, we need to have that yard open. There's another reason we need to have it open. This is a public yard. Most of this work now is being done by private industry. We have to have public yards. When we had an accident, when the subs had an accident, they were able to tow that to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. They're a 24/7 operation, and they've got the best workers in the world there. So national security demands that we have it there, because that's the first question when you spend federal money. Is there a security reason, or is there a compelling reason to put that kind of investment in? Absolutely. And then the workers. Are the workers of the grade that we need to do this work? And the answer for that is yes as well. So when I get back to Congress, I'll continue to put forth requests for funding for that yard, and I'll fight for that yard, and I'll fight for the people there.
This next question is from Ms. Bell. No Child Left Behind has had a wave of states asking for waivers. How do you feel about No Child Left Behind, and how would you change it?
I think that many children have still been left behind, despite the efforts of No Child Left Behind. I read today that New Hampshire has opted out of a waiver, and I agree with that. I think that states and municipalities really have the best understanding of what is good for the children in the schools, and it shouldn't be a mandate from the federal government. I think the federal government does play a role in education, and that's to serve as a catalyst to make sure all children have a fair and equal access to a solid and strong education. I know that it was certainly central to my family when I was growing up, that a solid education was very important, and it's something that we shouldn't take for granted. It is an opportunity for us here in New Hampshire to work with teachers and leadership to make sure every child has equal access to a very strong education. Thank you.
It's my take that though No Child Left Behind was well-intentioned, hoped for at some level. I think the problem with this is that we've got so many schools right now that are considered to be failing or falling below standard according to the No Child Left Behind standard that's been there. Clearly, one of the greatest success stories in this country has been our public education system. I think our forefathers knew, the generations, my parents' generation knew that a well-educated populace will add the most to our country. And clearly, if we continue to concentrate on education and increase our concentration in education, we will have the ability to compete in a global economic environment. No Child Left Behind, I think, needs to be stripped down to its core. We have to have teachers who are not teaching so students can take a test and achieve certain satisfactory scores. I don't think that's the nature of teaching. My mom was a public school teacher. You know, it wasn't, they took standard tests, but they were very few, and I know that the quality of education that I received in the public schools and that my mother brought to the public schools was really superior. And I feel that as we teach people to the test, we're losing focus of what the point of education is. It's to prepare people in a well-rounded fashion to be contributing members of our communities.
I served on the Education Labor Committee, and I was one of the reasons it never got out of committee, because I and others who came into me in 2006 knew this was not good for New Hampshire, it was not good for our communities. And the reason for it is because the intention is good. They want to measure yearly progress, and they have a phrase called adequate yearly progress, but they do it wrong. Instead of following the child to see where the child is in September and then where the child is in June and having the right measurements, multiple measurements to determine how successful the teacher is, they just go by the test. And so if you're in a challenged community, or you have a community where children don't speak English, then the scores are going to look bad, but it doesn't really reflect the growth of most of the children, and it doesn't properly reflect the ability of the teacher or the school. Now, I did agree with the decision that New Hampshire made not to ask for the waiver for two reasons. One, it would have given the state the power and the authority and the responsibility to grade the teachers and grade the principals, and I think that's wrong. That should be held locally. And the other problem is it would have asked them to turn in all of the test scores, including the test scores of the kids who don't speak English. And so if you think that the measurement's unfair now, can you imagine what it's like for a city like Manchester, where they have 78 languages in one district, and then they have these kids' test scores there? So it's not fair, and it undermines the confidence that people have in their communities. So while I absolutely agree there's a federal role there, this was not the way to do it.
The next question is to Carol Shea Porter. First, what would you do as a member of Congress to help small business, those who actually create jobs, most jobs, in New Hampshire and the United States? And there was a second question. What would you do specifically to bring these jobs to Farmington itself?
Okay, well, I would do what we were doing in the 110th and 111th Congress to help small business owners. And one of the things is that you have to give them a fighting chance. You have to have a small business administration that's properly funded that can help these small businesses launch. Then you have to help them compete with the big guys by helping them learn how to export to market and do all the other things that are necessary for small businesses. Then you also have to give them tax cuts. You have to help them write off the cost of the equipment, which we did. We accelerated the rate that they could write off the equipment expenses. And we also gave tax cuts for people if they hired. We gave them, the employers, a tax holiday if they hired a certain number of people. So there's a number of initiatives that I think were very helpful to small business and helped carry them through from the very dark days of October 2008 when Wall Street collapsed to now. So what we have seen is growth. We know that we've had 22 months of private sector growth, but that small businesses are still struggling. So this is no time to walk away from small business. Now, the other thing that we can do, and did do in the Congress, and to continue to do, is to link the community colleges and training with the students and with the communities and the businesses. In order to be competitive, we know now that we're not going to have the simple jobs anymore. We're going to have jobs where young men and women have to have the training, R&D, research and development, we're going to have a lot of technology. So we need to bring businesses in small colleges, community colleges, in to the communities, along with Farmington and all the others to attract the business. So tax breaks, tax cuts, incentives to hire, and education.
Well, Congress was busy bailing out the big banks and giving subsidies to oil companies. Our small business community was floundering. What we need to do, and what we should have done then and we can do now, is to open up access to capital for small businesses. We have 33,000 small businesses here in New Hampshire that have employees. And I've spoken to a few business owners that had difficulty getting a bridge loan even though they had receivables on the books. If they are indeed the real job creators, and I believe they are, then we should be doing everything within our power to make sure that they are successful and that they thrive. When I was in the investment business, one of the things that we did, we looked for small companies that were poised for growth and that were hiring, that also met very rigorous standards for corporate, social, and environmental practices. So I know that we can grow this economy in a sustainable way. We just need to have the political will to do it. That's what I will fight for in Congress.
I am a small business person. I know what it's like as a small business person, having gone through the Great Recession of 2008. It was very, very painful. Thankfully, we survived. Not only did we survive, but our business was able to expand. A lot of that had to do with just those of us in the business maybe getting a little bit better at what we were doing, looking towards controlling expenses, getting more out of our investments, and looking for alternative revenue streams. I think one of the first things we could do in Congress is to create demand for products. I know as a small business person, when people around me have some level of consumer confidence, they feel good about their job, not only now, but for the foreseeable future, they get a level of confidence which allows them to then make that step and purchase something. Congress can be involved in creating and helping to create an environment of confidence by, one, making sure small businesses have access to the capital that they need. Access through the Small Business Administration can also exert some influence on larger banks to make sure that they are freeing up the capital that small businesses need. We also want to be careful in how we're looking at regulation and what effect it has, what burdens it places on our small community banks that have been our best allies over the past few years. One of the greatest job creators we could invest in right now is an infrastructure project for this whole country. It would get people back to work immediately. It would poise us in good position for the future. It's a great investment and it will create great demand.
The next question is to Mr. Hosmer. What is your position on increasing regulation for federal bank institutions?
I think we've heard it here this evening, and I don't think it's any mystery to many people in this country. Our economic meltdown of 2008 was fueled by Wall Street. The biggest banks gambling with our money, taking advantage of people in the home mortgage crisis, paying themselves giant bonuses, bankrupting the country, and then looking for a handout from the federal government. Too big to fail was real. The federal government stepped in, gave them interest-free loans. They still have paid themselves giant bonuses, but I'm not convinced that these largest of banks on Wall Street wouldn't do it all over again if they could find an exotic investment of which they could pay themselves obscene amounts of money. I think Dodd-Frank creating additional oversight on Wall Street to protect consumers and make sure those of us who are paying taxes are not bailing out these big banks after they have taken advantage of people is the right move. I think this oversight is absolutely necessary, but I also want to make sure that it doesn't have unintended consequences on our small banks, our community banks, because they are the backbone of our small business community, and we need them. So I don't want to lump in on these small banks with Dodd-Frank and the Wall Street banks that got us into this position. So I think we should be looking for a prudent way to enforce Dodd-Frank and make it as strong as we can so we don't end up in 2008 again.
Well, I did vote for the Wall Street reform because after what we saw happen in 2008, where they pushed us right to the edge of a depression, we had all had enough. And I don't think it was as tough as it should have been, but it was as tough as it could be, considering all the special interests that were there fighting us every single day. So what we got out of that was we got a plan now where we don't have to worry about too big to fail anymore, because they actually have to plan their own death, it's called, in case it happens again. And we also put the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau in, which I'm absolutely delighted to say is going to be sitting there for us. And we also toughened up and made tighter regulations so that the books will be looked at a little more closely. Now, does this take care of all the problems? Does this mean they won't be able to do this again? Of course not. We have to regulate, and we have to stay on them, and we already see lots of ways that they're wiggling around some of it. And that's why you need to have members of Congress who are advocates for the public. Because, and then to find out who's an advocate for the public, you want to look at who finances them, who contributes money to their campaigns. If you really want to know who's going to protect the consumer, who's going to protect the middle class, who's going to protect the people of the country, you need to see the financial records of the people who are running for Congress and see who they take money from. That was the biggest problem that we had as we worked to reform, that there were so many members of Congress who were sitting way too close to a lot of lobbyists and a lot of banks, and so it kept us from having everything that we needed.
The bailout of the big banks, I think, caused a couple of things to happen. It focused our attention on what's wrong with the system, and then it forced Congress, which was a good thing, to come up with a remedy. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is there in place to help simplify the communication between financial institutions and consumers. The one thing that I think we need to look at, which we haven't yet, is making a return to Glass-Steagall, which would separate the role of investment banks and commercial banks, and so there would not be any proprietary trading allowed. When I was working in the investment business, one of the things that we pushed for was greater transparency and disclosure of practices in all sectors, including the financial sector. We worked with the Securities and Exchange Commission to make sure that some of the regulations that were in place were actually being enforced. And that's an area that I think that we could really focus on. There are plenty of rules on the books, but what we don't have are boots on the ground to enforce them.
Thank you. This next question first is to Ms. Dowdell. There's a great deal of concern about the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court and the enormous amount of money being spent on undisclosed donors in the current election as well as the 2010 election. What situation would you consider to make these elections cleaner?
Campaign finance has gotten so out of control. It's unimaginable. And the fact that corporations are people, that's a good one, if you want to believe that. But I think that this flood of money which is influencing elections is really changing the dynamic of our democracy. And we have an opportunity now in 2012 to really change the composition of the leadership in Congress. What we need are leaders who are going to stand up and promote public financing, changing the campaign finance laws. There has to be restrictions. And I think that working, while it was a Supreme Court decision, there needs to be an effort to see that the Supreme Court reverses their decision on that rule. It really has caused so much damage in our system, and I think it's only going to get worse with these super PACs.
It's clear to me that with the Citizens United decision, that the influence on politics by the super rich, the super PACs, and corporations has completely adulterated democracy in this country. You know, when we talk about where the money is, who's financing which campaign, from the outside looking in, I always thought, where's the money when it comes to legislation? Who is pushing legislation, and why are they pushing it? You can look back over the past few years and see legislation that's being pushed and financed by the largest of corporations. And why are they doing that? It's clear to me it has to do with a profit motive. And when it's only done for a profit motive, when you've got the Supreme Court backing up these corporations and determining they are citizens, it takes the vote away from so many people in this country. Those with the money seem to have the most influence on legislation. Those without the money, that don't have either large checkbooks or big PACs behind them, lose their voice. And I think that's what's tragic in this country. It's working families, it's children, it's senior citizens. Those who are the most vulnerable don't have the voice of the largest of Wall Street firms, the largest of oil companies. Therefore, any legislation coming out of Congress has the potential to continue to hurt them. And that's completely unacceptable.
Well, there's several steps we can take to change this, but it really will have to come from the people. The people will have to insist on this. One is Senator Bernie Sanders has an amendment that says corporations are not people and therefore can be regulated by states and the federal government. Period. That's what we need. We need an amendment that says corporations are not people. The second thing is that we can pass legislation such as fair elections now. And the fair elections bill says that what happens for people to run for office is they need to get a certain number of signatures, they have to get a certain number of people donate, no more than $100 each, and then when they reach that threshold, then they can get federal financing, they can get support to run, and that would help. And the third thing is we have to pass the Disclose Act. The Disclose Act at least tells us who the Superfund people are. Right now, we don't know. You know, last time I saw all this money thrown against me, and it was like Americans for Puppies and against Carol. You know, who is that? And that was the issue, that we didn't even know who we were fighting and who was attacking us. And so the Disclose Act would help, the Fair Elections Bill would help, and an amendment that says corporations are not people and can be regulated by the state and federal government.
This last question will start with Carol Shea Porter. It's a difficult time in the Middle East. How do you see the U.S. role in such different scenarios as Syria, Iran, and Egypt?
Well, it is a very difficult time. I was on the Armed Services Committee, and we were watching all of this develop over a number of years. And this Arab Spring still holds great potential, and we've seen several countries that have done well, but we have this concern about Iran. And one of the issues that has Iran and the countries concerning on edge is that Iran is concerned because there could be, they call it Sunni crescent, where there are Muslims, but they are different. And so Saudi Arabia and other countries right up to Turkey are different from Iran and have a lot of issues with Iran. Not to mention the fact that they have those religious differences, but then they also have a leader in Iran who is just absolutely over the edge there. So when you look at what's happening there, the United States has to tread very, very carefully. And they have to work with the United Nations. They can't take this on by themselves. And if NATO agrees, NATO could have a role as well. But we have to be very careful. We want to support the democratic change, and we want to be there for these countries with what we call soft power, economic aid, that maybe is food, maybe is schools, education, medical care. But we want to make sure that the Arab people themselves and the people in that area are the ones that are pushing for this change. And I have hope for that region still.
That region of the country continues to be very volatile. And with 2 wars that were unbudgeted, I think that it is wise for the United States to take a role that certainly is a leadership, but we don't have to make a unilateral decision. And we are in the process of bringing troops home, and I think that that's what our emphasis should be on. We should exercise all of our diplomatic resources and deploy those first. I don't think that we can assume that these regimes are the ones taking over are going to be favorable, so we do have to pay very close attention. Iran poses a threat to the region because of their interest in developing nuclear weapons, so we do, of course, have to be mindful of that as well. But we have a lot of problems right here at home that we need to fix. And we need to shift our focus to our domestic policy and strengthening our domestic policy. People need to get back to work, and our economy needs to grow again. And those are the types of things that I would be focusing on. How to create jobs, how to grow our economy so that we retain our #1 status in the world.
I think clearly the goal for the United States should be peace, prosperity, and democracy in the Middle East. But we cannot afford to get engaged in matters there in a unilateral fashion that destabilizes a country. I think one of the greatest dangers to not only Israel, the United States, but the world is a nuclear Iran. Threatening the Straits of Hormuz and crimping off the supply of oil, it could be devastating to our economy. But I think it leads to the broader question. We can work within NATO. I would not be inclined to defer to the United Nations here. But I think we should be working with our friends and our allies around the world. We should be working with our NATO alliances to bring peace, prosperity, and democracy to the Middle East. We as a nation, though, can take some affirmative steps when it comes to energy policy. We are so dependent on oil coming in from unfriendlies around the world, and particularly in the Middle East. Our economy is so vulnerable to any problems, any issues that arise that will affect the flow of that oil to this country. We really should have an energy policy in this country that begins to wean us off imported oil. If we can stand alone and be energy independent within the next generation, certainly whatever happens in the Middle East will not have an immediate and devastating impact on our economy, and that should be our goal.
So next question first is to Mr. Hosmer. What is your opinion of the Keystone XL pipeline?
The more I follow this debate on the Keystone XL pipeline, I have to keep asking asking the question, what's in it for us in America? And I still can't figure out that answer. I think it's great that 6,000 temporary construction jobs are important. Jobs are good, and we should be looking for ways to create more jobs in this country. But we're creating a pipeline that runs from Canada to Port Arthur, Texas. The jobs will be gone after the pipeline is finished, and we don't get any of the oil that's coming through this country. TransCanada has made it quite clear, though on the one hand they say it helps us reduce our reliance on foreign oil. But when they're asked the follow-up question, will any of that oil that's being pumped through the central part of America, will it come to those of us in America? The answer is no. And to make matters worse, once it's refined in Port Arthur, Texas, and shipped to China, Latin America, and Europe, that's still not going to drive down oil prices in this country. And on top of that, the refineries, because they're in a foreign trade zone, pay no taxes on it. I don't understand what's in it for this. I think this is a rush to put a pipeline in by Republicans, by big oil interests around the world that's influencing this, and I don't see the clear advantage. I don't think there is a clear advantage. I am not supporting the Keystone XL pipelines.
Well, I've been amused by the Republicans saying how many jobs this is going to create. Some say 100,000, as Frank Gintis said. The National Chamber of Commerce said, oh, maybe 500,000. We've had numbers all over the place, but the reality is that it's going to create about 2,600 to 4,600 jobs, and that's what TransCanada said themselves. So that was misleading. They also said there wouldn't be any leaks, you don't have to worry about it, but there's an XL pipeline right now that's had 12 leaks in a year. And then the third part is that it's to drive up the cost of energy in the Midwest, because that's where the pipeline ends now. They can get a better price on the world market, so they want to take it to the refineries and then send it out. Now, the head of the National Chamber of Commerce said that we weren't being very nice to our Canadian allies when we were saying no to them. But our Canadian allies said, well, if you don't take it, we'll just ship it to China. So I would say that was rather threatening on their part. But behind the whole story is where all this starts. Guess who's there? The Koch brothers. The Koch brothers just happen to be right there, ready to ship, ready to make profit all the way through. So this is not something that enriches the United States. It doesn't help us get off our oil dependency, because they will be shipping it. When Senator Markey asked, Congressman Markey asked point blank to the head of the Canadian Transportation, are we going to get to keep this oil? He said no. He would not commit to us keeping the oil. So there's no gain and a lot of loss and potential loss.
This is a very good example, this Keystone Pipeline, of trying to ram something down the throats of the American people. The risk to our environment is unimaginable with a pipeline. And the length of that pipeline would automatically calls for a problem. Pipelines leak. And now you look at the cost for cleanup, and you look at the risk to the communities where those leaks will occur, because they will occur. What we have to do is find alternative sources of energy. We should be directing our focus and our attention on ways to incentivize businesses to really scale up renewable and alternative sources of energy. We have an opportunity right here in New Hampshire to help lead the way in that area that would bring jobs to New Hampshire. That's what we should be focusing on, not building a pipeline. I want to say a pipeline to nowhere, but it's not building a pipeline that we benefit only from a handful of jobs. We could put far more people to work if we focused on building out our portfolio of renewable and alternative sources of energy. Those are the types of issues that I think Congress should be focused on
have two very similar questions. I'm going to read them both. Define yourself as a Democrat. What does being a Democrat mean to you? And our party has allowed others to define us much too often. What defines our party, Mr. Mazzella?
When I think of Democrats, I think of people who really care about the future of this country, that are willing to work together to get things done. I think that it is, for me in particular, it's having certain rights and protecting those rights. Allowing people to have an opportunity to determine their own future, to determine their health decisions, to determine who they want to marry. It's not for government to impose its rights on people, but to allow people to live with the freedom that those rights give us. And what I see now is really a Congress, and it's at the state level as well. This is across the country, where all of that is at risk. I think that the issue is clear for me that we need to make sure that we are educating our neighbors and our friends. And I think that's part of being a Democrat as well.
I'm a Democrat because I believe that Democrats believe in empowering people. That we believe that equal opportunity should be for everyone, regardless of gender, color, creed, orientation, and that we're willing to fight for that. I believe as a Democrat, we believe that opportunity, economic opportunity in this country, the chance to live your American dream, is vitally important to America and to each of us individually. I've supported Planned Parenthood. I've supported our organized labor. I believe these are some issues that are tried and true Democratic issues. To be a Democrat to me means that we look to the future and we look for possibilities. We lean into the future, we embrace challenges, we embrace ideas, we appreciate vigorous debate based on facts, and we have the ability to put out a hand to someone that maybe we don't agree with, but we're willing to work with them for a better future in this America. I believe that we really are all in this together, and that we should continue to work together and not create a class system of those that have and those that don't have.
I'm a Democrat because I believe, like most Democrats, that government does have a role to play in our lives. We don't want government on our backs, but we sure want government on our side. And so we know that we want a country where children who are born will have an opportunity to excel, that they'll be able to follow their dreams, that they'll have a chance to go to school, and that if they need a hand up to do that, they'll get it. We believe as Democrats that children, all children, should be respected, and all children should have the same chance to level the playing field. We don't like to see a sense of unfairness. We believe that there are rules. There are moral rules, and there should also be legal rules to make sure that it's fair out there. We believe in working men and women. We believe in the middle class, and we believe in bringing people to the middle class. We certainly believe in profit. We believe in capitalism. We believe in all of of those things. But we differ from our Republican friends because we do believe that government has a role and that the best we can do as a country is when we unite with one another and we work towards common goals. When we decide that it's not fair to discriminate against people, and so we work to pass legislation to help people. I'm very, very proud of the change in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell when we repealed that. I was proud of the Lilly Ledbetter Act. These were all things Democrats brought forward because it wasn't fair. It offended us. It offended our values that some people would be discriminated against because they have a different sexual orientation and they could lose their jobs, or that they would be paid differently because they were female, not male. So what Democrats stand for is equal opportunity for all. And we work towards that every single day, in every single way. And we don't, and I want to repeat that, we don't want government on our backs, but we want government on our side. And we believe together we can get to where this country needs to go.
The next question is to Carol Shea Porter. How can we help stop the assault on the middle class and union rights across America?
Vote for Democrats. Because Democrats believe in working men and women. They believe that teachers are good for our community, and we're thankful for them. We're thankful for firefighters, and we're thankful for the police, and we recognize the role of the public sector employees. And we know that when we have employees who are out there checking our food, checking our air, checking to make sure that our roads are safe, that the airplanes have been inspected, and these are good union jobs. But we know that these are the kinds of jobs that we want. We want to, when we get on a plane, we want to make sure that it's been looked at. When we go to a restaurant, we want to make sure that somebody's inspecting the meat. So we need to stand together as Democrats and put Democrats in there and speak up for these working men and women. We cannot allow them to attack working men and women in the middle class anymore. There's a reason that they're doing this. The National Chamber of Commerce wants to abolish minimum wage. When you look at some of these big, big corporations, they are not interested in individual rights, individual wages. This is not their agenda. It is the Democratic agenda. But you saw what happened in Wisconsin when we stood together. We're standing together in New Hampshire now and around the country. And we will beat this back. We will be on the front lines for working men and women in the middle class. But the only way to do this is to put Democrats in office in Concord and to put them in office in D.C. We have a lot of work to do.
Collective bargaining rights. It is a right. And they are trying to strip, Republicans are trying to strip this right from right underneath our feet. It is a single playbook that is working its way across the country and is also taking place and taking hold in Washington. One of the things that we did was work with labor leaders. I worked with labor leaders across the country to help make sure that companies were bargaining in good faith. One thing that has always been very curious to me is why is it that executives, senior executives, corporate executives, president, CEO, COO, they have the ability to negotiate their contracts. They have compensation that is through the roof. They have benefits that carry on long after they're gone. So why is it that working people can't negotiate their own employment contracts? It is a right. We need to protect it. They're trying to strip it away, but it is fundamental to who we are in America. Our 5-day work week, our vacation, our sick leave, occupational safety regulations, that's because of unions. We need to protect it, and I'll work hard to do that.
Certainly the attack on organized labor and the right-to-work movement is politically motivated, particularly in this state where much of this legislation is coming from outside this state. It is unfairly targeting the working families, working men and women that helped make this country great. Real wages have been stagnant now since the early 1970s. Union membership has gone down drastically since then. You know, I remember in the town where I grew up, which was a union town, it was solidly middle class, with good schools, good parks, with people who could put roofs over their heads and food on the table. That's the America I believe we should be trying to achieve once again. Not continuing enriching the rich and grinding the poor down to dust. That's wholly unfair and completely un-American. I have stood proudly with organized labor in Concord over the past year or so, fighting this right-to-work legislation. It's bad for the state, it's bad for the country. We should be working at the federal level for project labor agreements to make sure that those that are building our roads, our bridges, our highways, our schools, our power grid, are paid a fair wage with health care in a safe working environment, and they can depend on retirement with dignity.
Mr. Hosmer, what is your position on earmarks?
Looking at Congress and the nature of earmarks over the past, I don't know how many years, I think it signifies to me there are negative connotations associated with it. They tend to be, in my mind, pet projects that are stuffed into bills. They don't see the light of day, or they're not open to a debate, a factual debate on the floor. And I think it's one of the reasons that Congress has an approval rating of it's in the single digits right now. I think if we want projects funded with federal dollars, we ought to be brave enough to let them stand alone, to put it in a bill that's debated, that sees the light of day, that constituents have an opportunity to weigh in on, and members have the ability, the members of Congress have the ability to vote straight up or straight down on that bill. I support any legislation that would prevent additional earmarks from coming to the floor of Congress. I believe it would inspire people, get them to believe that Congress is working for them, not against them, not in the dark of night, trying to slip something by and get a pet project funded.
It's interesting to me when we talk about earmarks, the port projects, that really what it is members of Congress are trying to bring jobs home to their districts. And some of the projects that they are getting funded with earmarks aren't all bad projects. There's some that are very good. I think the challenge, though, is that when states like New Hampshire, with our 1.3 million people, we fight for every single federal dollar that we get. And so to do anything on top of that, there has to be a mechanism in place. And one of the things that I would propose, so that there is sunshine on the situation with earmarks, would be some type of an account that we could fund and therefore reapportion or authorize spending on particular projects by state. That there would be a request, not a backroom deal. And they have taken this out of the process, so earmarks are no longer allowed, but members are still trying to work around that. If you can find a loophole, go through it. But I think we could be more reasonable about those special projects that we want to bring home to our districts to put people to work and to help grow our economy.
Well, I have to say that I have been and continue to be a supporter of earmarks. You have two choices here because the spending is going to be had. You have to you have to pave roads, you have to have health education, you have to have centers, you have to have the things that, you have to have a wastewater treatment center and places like that. So you can either let the executive branch decide, and bureaucrats who have never been to Farmington or anywhere in New Hampshire decide, or you can say that the person that you elected probably knows the district and knows what you need. And so I support earmarks. Now, there was a huge problem with them, but when we came into Congress in 2006, we changed the rules. So if you asked for an earmark, you had to put your name next to it, you had to sign an affidavit that you were not going to benefit financially from that earmark. And that's how you do it. It's not that the earmarks are inherently bad, it's just that they were misused. And in 2006, we changed that. So you look at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, without earmarks, it wouldn't be there. The Navy doesn't want it. It's been running on earmarks for many, many years. Look at healthcare centers, same deal. Those are earmarks. You look at projects that are done that bring business to communities, those are earmarks there. So it's congressionally directed spending, and it's not an enormous part of the budget. It's less than 1%. So I would support earmarks, and I support the way to make sure that we're not abusive of it.
Carol, in Farmington, you'd be hard-pressed to find a street without a vacant house or home taken by the bank. How would you work to stop this crisis of foreclosures?
Well, first let me say what we did try to do. We tried to put some money, first of all, when they did the TARP, which I voted against, and the reason I voted against the Troubled Asset Relief Program was because they weren't putting the money where the homeowners were, where the struggling homeowners were. They were putting the money for the banks, and I thought the money should have been directed to those who had been harmed by what the banks had done. So there's a lot of money coming, $25 billion, which is not enough, but it's a good start that the president has, which will do several things. It will help some people, but not all the people, for their debt. Okay, they can refinance. Some of it will be what we call cram down, which we tried to actually pass as a law, and we were defeated in that. And what that did was actually lower the amount of the mortgage that was due. So you have to support people and keep them in their homes, because what's happened is they've come in like vultures and they have bought up the homes and then sold them. And that was happening even at that time in 2008, 2009, where one of the congressmen from Chicago told me that a California company had come in and just like bought up blocks of homes there. And it would have been much cheaper to save the homes. So right now, what's done, it's tragic what's happened to the people there. So first of all, we have to work on creating more jobs so that people have the money to do that. We have to try to reduce their mortgages where it's appropriate, reduce their interest rates, and change a lot of the terms there. So the $25 billion that the Obama administration has proposed is a good start, and the banks will be the ones paying for it.
The $25 billion is a good start, but it's just that. What it doesn't do is include a provision for people who are unemployed that are at risk of losing their homes. What we need to do is to be able to find a way to help those people who are unemployed. We've made some ground to try to create jobs and put bills in place that will open up access to capital, or create roads, build roads and bridges, the shovel-ready projects. But Republicans are doing everything in their power to stop any progress being made going forward. And loan modifications, the banks were not incentivized to work fast enough. That was a logjam of unimaginable proportions. Now they're doing principal write-downs, but they haven't been able to get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to do the same. And that's where a vast majority of the mortgages originate, and that's really where we should be putting pressure. We need to apply more pressure to Fannie and Freddie. We need to help people who are doing everything that they can, spending their savings to stay in their homes, we need to be making provisions for those that are unemployed to be able to stay in their homes.
I think it's very difficult to right the wrongs of what was done in the mortgage industry in the mid-2000s, we'll say. But I think the first step we can do right now is the government to take an active and leadership role in getting people back to work. If people are working, they can pay their rent, they can pay a mortgage. But if they don't have a job, then they're not going to be able to stay in a house or an apartment. They can't afford it. We should be looking to spur this economy on immediately with an infrastructure project, with creating research and development grants and tax incentives so people can get back to work immediately. You know, it's interesting that the banks are still the ones that are the obstacles here, seemingly always on the other side of people who are on Main Street or the streets of Farmington who've been moved out of their houses and can't keep a roof over their head. I think the best time to have gotten the best deal from those banks was the moment when they needed the federal government to bail them out. That's when we had the most leverage with them. That's when we should have said, look, if you want a bailout of any sort, we need to deal with this mortgage crisis straight on. We need to start rewriting these loans immediately and reducing the principal outstanding. We need to get away from the adjustable rate mortgages and come down to something that's more reasonable in the 4% range right now. This would give working families and seniors a fighting chance to keep a roof over their head.
Andrew, what's your position on parental consent?
I am a pro-choice Democrat. I believe that abortion is an intensely personal decision, best left up to the woman, her doctor, and anyone else she chooses to bring into that circle of decision making. I do believe that parental consent, to the extent that minor children should have an opportunity to speak with someone before having an abortion. There are certain situations, though, when the life of the female is at risk, that I would trust a doctor to make an informed decision about what to do in regards to that pregnancy. Unfortunately, Republicans will try anything they can to repeal Roe v. Wade. I will stand up for a woman's right to choose. I will stand with Planned Parenthood, and I will stand with the President in making sure that contraception is available free of charge to every woman.
As the mother of 2 children, I've often thought about that when people have asked me, and in my heart, of course, I say to myself, I want my daughter to talk to me, and I want my son to talk to me, and we have that kind of relationship. But I also know, as somebody who was a social work administrator for years, that there are many families where not only are they unable to speak to the parent, but it's the parent himself who has abused the young girl. And so she is trapped in this situation. So, you know, there's other abusive relatives that maybe they're not believed. It's a very complicated story. So I believe that we have to trust that families who have those relationships will be talking to each other, will be supportive of one another, but we simply must protect the young girls who cannot talk to their families, and indeed would have further abuse if they spoke to their families, and allow them to be able to make that choice, because life is not perfect. And we have to not just think about our own families that are intact and supportive and loving, but recognize that there are many that are not, and that these young girls have to be able to do what they need to do without speaking to possibly the very person who was the abuser or a family member. So I think that you have to allow the young women to make their decisions.
Consent is an issue that I think is masking the real problem. And that is, as Andrew said, the dismantling of a woman's right to choose. And we need to be very mindful of the tools, tactics, and techniques that those on the other side are using to deflect attention from the real issue. We need to protect women's right to choose, and this includes young girls. There is so much that is at risk here, and it's such a delicate issue, but I certainly believe that this is where people have the power. And we saw it in the recent issue between the Komen Foundation and Planned Parenthood. And people spoke up, men and women. So we do have an opportunity to exercise our right to have a voice in this debate. And I think with bringing people together and coalescing around this issue, we will succeed. But make no mistake, they are trying to chip around the edges of Roe v. Wade any kind of way that they can. And we need to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that a woman's right to choose and to make decisions about her own health care are protected.
Sorry about Mike, I'm going to have to hand it right back. What will you do to help preserve the protections we've already begun to realize from the Affordable Health Care Act? And is this important to you?
The Affordable Health Care Act was just a monumental effort to really move this train out of the station. The issue here is healthcare costs and the rising cost of healthcare. And the fact that still, despite all the benefits that we have already seen go into effect with the Affordable Health Care Act, that there's still more that has to be done. It's very, very important to me. It's very, very personal. Right now, my niece is in a hospital bed. She was she had a kidney transplant about 2 years ago. And because of the Affordable Health Care Act, she was able to stay on her father's insurance. And since that time, she's been able to get her own insurance because she doesn't know she can't be denied because of a pre-existing condition. This is very, very personal, and I know a number of people who have similar situations. Access to health care is paramount, and the bill was a great start, but there's more that we can do. To this day, insurance companies still have too much power over our quality of care. And we need to put that back in the hands of the practitioners, of the doctors. That's something that I will work on.
I think the Affordable Care Act was a bold and courageous first step. I can tell you as a small business person my experience with healthcare and healthcare insurance. We have about 200 employees. Healthcare is part of the benefits package that we offer to our employees. Insurance premiums over the past decade have steadily increased year after year after year. 12%, 15%, 17%. We as an employer pay approximately 70% of that premium. But I know at the end of each year, we look at the price associated with what we paid to cover our portion of health care for our employees, and it was staggering. I also know that there were many men and women who worked for me who in some respects would look at their wages and say they would be solidly middle class. But when they realized what it would cost for them to insure their family, they realized they couldn't afford it. There's something very sad about that. And I would see these kids come into the dealership, and I would know or have some idea that they weren't insured because the family couldn't afford it. I think employers could not bear the increases that were coming at us in the years to come. I know so many employees, so many working families out there could not afford health care. Something had to be done. We may tinker with it around the edges and make it better, but there are a lot of good things about that act. And I would work to make it stronger and make sure that everyone was covered.
Well, I want to thank both of them for saying it was a bold and courageous act, because I was on one of the 3 committees in the House that wrote that bill. And I used to say that the health care bill is making me sick, because we had so much work to do, and we had to cut through so many barriers to make this happen. And it was pushing the train out of the station. I wanted to see a public option there. There were many roadblocks along the way and things that twists and turns. But I knew that we had to do this, because when my children were born, they were diagnosed with asthma very quickly. And I always thought that when they were out of the house, that they would have trouble getting insurance. And from the time they were born, I worried about that. And so I knew that this would help not just my family, but other families. And people would say, well, we're going to throw you out of Congress. You're going to lose your seat for this. Remember all those health care bills? And I'd say, but I didn't come to warm the seat. I came to work for health care. I came to work for my children and your children. And so I am absolutely delighted that that is now law, and that children will have insurance, that adults will have insurance, that the insurance companies have to cover everybody, and that if you get sick, you won't lose your house once all the provisions are in there, because there aren't going to be caps, so that if you're sick longer than the insurance company wants you to be, you'll still be protected. 5 presidents tried to do this, and I'm delighted that we got it done.
We unfortunately need to change the tape for the broadcast of this, so we're going to take a 1-minute break. And there's a few more questions. I'd like to ask the chair of Farmington, do you want us to continue on with a few more questions, Manny?
Hey, Brian?
Would you like us to continue with a few more questions? Or do you want us to go to closing comments?
You're the moderator, Leo. I think, people have been very patient, but it's entirely up to you. It's your show.
I think what we'll do is a couple more questions. There are 2 or 3 more that are fairly significant. And then we'll go to the closing remarks. So it'll just be 1 minute. Have a quick cup of coffee and we'll be right back. Prevent this license extension and to force the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to do its job of protecting the public health and safety.
Well, I don't think they should be allowed to apply for a license that long in advance. I think that's unbelievable, actually, but I know that it's true. I also think that we have to start moving away from nuclear power. We know that there are a number of options that we can take right now. We've been investing in solar, we've been investing in wind. We know that conservation is a huge part of this. And by the way, Lois, last time you really heard a lot of talk about conserving energy. So we have a number of steps that we can take. Nuclear is a mature industry, and yet it still can't pay for itself. It still is heavily subsidized, and it's just wrong to impose this on us. And then when you take a plant that is obviously not working very well, I can remember a few years ago, the problems with Seabrook included broken gates, cameras that didn't work, they weren't even doing proper maintenance and making sure that they were safe from terrorists or from others. So I do believe that we cannot give them that license now, and that we have to be protected. These agencies should be there for us. When we live as close as we do to nuclear power plants, we have a right to expect that the federal government is extremely aggressive and very, very vigilant for us.
One thing that we need to be mindful of is that Seabrook is an employer. And for two reasons that we need to be paying attention to this issue is one, safety, but also our economy. We do need to look at the regulations. It seems that there could be changes, as I see it, changes in the law so that nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants could not file for an extension that far out. And there should be enhanced safety requirements in order to apply for that. I know that I watched the issue at Yankee in Vermont where they were leaching all kinds of chemicals into the water supply there, and the dangers posed by a weakening foundation could lead to the same issues here. So I would be very, I would really not be in favor of extending the license until those repairs were made. But I do agree that we should be focused on renewable and alternative sources of energy. We need to be ramping up and expanding our portfolio from solid waste to energy, wind, and solar.
As a father of 4, I watched the nuclear situation in Japan with a great deal of concern, thinking about Seabrook being so close to myself and my family. And I think it was clear to me that, and if I'm not mistaken, there was a 50-mile radius around the plant where they said anything shorter, closer than 50 miles, you were okay, but outside of 50 miles, there were some dangers. Well, no, within 50 miles, dangers. Thank you. Yes, outside of 50 miles, okay. And I began to think that where my house is compared to the Seabrook nuclear power plant, I'm clearly within the range of something very bad happening to me and my family. And I thought to myself, that's really a frightening possibility. Sometimes these nuclear power plants just go humming right along. We forget about them to some extent. And then you drive by it and you say, my gosh, what happens if? I'm very concerned about this license extension in regard when we look at the facts that the structural deficiencies at that plant are of grave concern. I would not be willing to support an extension of that license until I was completely satisfied of the structural integrity of Seabrook nuclear power plant. And I agree that what we should be looking at is alternative, renewable, and clean sources of energy, wind, solar, hydro, going forth.
Andy, the occupancy movement, what are your thoughts on it, and what are the ideas behind the movement?
Well, I wasn't part of the movement. I can't speak with an intimate knowledge. But I do understand what it's like to put myself through college, put myself through law school, think I did everything right. I worked hard, studied hard, and waiting to leave law school and waiting for that job where I could pay down my student loan debt, and quickly realizing that job wasn't there. I thought to myself, when that happened to me, what did I do wrong? I thought I was doing everything right, and what am I going to do with this student loan debt that is larger than a mortgage? So when these occupiers talk about where is the opportunity for them after they've graduated school, after they've played by the rules, and now the system seems to be rigged against them, I understand where they're coming from. It is frightening to have massive student loan debt and no opportunities in front of you. It scared me, and I certainly want for my children opportunity. I know that education is important, but once they work hard, get their education, I want America to be everything it was promised to be, a land of opportunity for everyone. And I'm afraid that when the occupiers look at our government and look at the future of our country, they see that the promise has not been fulfilled. And again, the system's rigged against them. So I am certainly very empathetic as to where they're coming from.
I think they've done a good job in providing a voice for so many people across the country, and that's why you saw it start small and then more people, and at first it was young, and then older people showed up, and working people as well as people who couldn't find jobs. And what they were doing, what they were saying was that fix this, bring back the American dream, give us the opportunity that we see for people who are blessed to be born into top 1%. I never thought that they were envious of the top 1%. I think all they've been asking is that they get a piece of the pie too. And they were the voices there, standing there, making the rest of the country focus and say, no, there is something wrong with this. And I think from there, we've had this chance to start really looking, and certainly the news media has covered a lot of stories about what the top 1% pay, for example, in taxes versus others. We've had a chance to look at the economics of the country and what's fair, what's unfair. So I think what we're going to get out of this is a program, and we'll get some legislation eventually when Democrats come back, that say, look, everybody's got to be fair about this. Work hard and you get rewarded. But you can't take all of it. And you have to pay your fair share. We see Mitt Romney paying, what, 13.7%, while most people are paying about 30%. There's just something fundamentally wrong. And that's what the occupiers were saying, and that's what made the country sit up and take note.
The Occupy movement has been very interesting to watch unfold. One of the things that comes that I see is democracy in process. This is one of the things that makes our country so great. Civil disobedience, the ability to have a voice and to use it, and also to be noticed and heard. There are a number of issues that have risen out of the Occupy movement. And one thing that I see is an absence of confidence. And we have a real opportunity here to turn that around. We can change the composition of Congress. That is within our power to do that. And we can change the composition of our state house. That is within our power to do that. And this movement has really helped amplify some of the issues that we already were aware of. Jobs in the economy, access to health care, helping small businesses, being able to focus on the issues that are very important and not dismissing the opinions and the thoughts and views of the working families, the foundation of our economy. So we really need to pay attention and to use it as an instructive example of things that we can change here in the country.
I think that's going to be it for this evening in terms of questions. There's going to be an opportunity for the closing comments. I'd ask the candidates to remain. There are a few. We could go on for quite a while longer with the questions that we have. I know that there are some of you who would like to continue to have conversation. I'll ask the candidates if they would please spend a little time one-on-one with you after this is over. Andy, would you like to have 2 minutes for a closing comment?
Sure, I think we were just getting warmed up here, aren't we? Thank you again for the invitation, the opportunity to introduce myself and talk about issues. I think the questions were really outstanding. You know, I think this country is at a critical crossroads between two different visions of what this country, America, is going to be. And the Republican vision is less regulation, less taxes, less funding for education, for research, more dependence on imported oil. When I look at America, I think we deserve better. My vision is different. We should have fair taxes. We should have the best education system in the world. We should be supporting small business people. We should be supporting women in their right to choose. We should be restoring the American dream, which means opportunity for all. Certainly a rising economic tide will raise all boats, and that's what we should be striving for. I want my children to have the same opportunities that my brothers and I had. That, again, if they work hard, if they play by the rules, they can live their American dream. As a small business person who employs 200 people, who's had a certain degree of success, I know what it's like to make a business grow and thrive. I believe that we need a Congress that's focused on jobs and the economy, and stop using wedge issues and social issues to divide this country and to pit one person against another. We need to work together with a common vision. I want to be your congressman because I know I have the experience and the background. I know what works in a small business. I care for the future that my children will inherit. And I'll work very hard for each and every one of you. Thank you again.
I would like to thank the Farmington Dens for putting this forum together. I think it was wonderful. And I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. I would be delighted to continue this conversation and will stay a few moments if you have more questions of me. I do invite you to visit my website, dowdellforcongress.com. There you can sign up for campaign updates. You can like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was that we do have a choice in 2012. We can continue to go backwards, or we can elect leaders that have the vision and the determination to find a new and better way forward. I think that we have come to a place, a crossroads really, and we are now posed with a simple question. What do we think the future of America can be? And I think it can be greater than it is today. And I'm running for Congress because I want to preserve the American dream for generations to come. And I'm concerned that if we don't change our course as a nation, that dream won't hold true for our children's children. My parents worked tirelessly to make sure my siblings and I had better opportunities than they had. And love of God and country, respect, responsibility, loyalty, and a strong work ethic were the values that I was raised on. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. And he would talk about loyalty and stress its importance. That when he knew his crewmates had his back, they knew he had theirs. I'll have your back in Congress. Thank you very much.
When I first ran in 2006, I said I was running for the rest of us, and I would go to Washington and speak up for the rest of us, and that I would not be tangled with special interests, that you could count on me, that I would be there to serve you. And I kept my promise, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to serve for 4 years. I can't wait to get back. I was very honored to be on the Armed Services Committee, having been a military spouse and very proud wife of a veteran. And I was very honored to serve the military men and women and see them in action around the world. I went to Iraq a couple of times, Afghanistan a couple of times. I was very, very proud that we passed a new GI Bill of Rights, which allows these combat veterans to go to college now and gives them an opportunity. It's our way to say thank you. I was on the Natural Resources Committee, so I sat there for you and for me during the BP spill and during the mining disasters. I went to West Virginia to be with those families and to work on legislation to help regular people. And then in the Education and Labor Committee, I was very honored to speak up for working men and women and to work hard for the reauthorization for education programs that would give all kids a chance to succeed in this country. I enjoyed the work immensely, and I'm asking if you send me back again, because I'll do exactly the same thing. I will work for the rest of us. I'm at shayporter.com, and yes, I'm on Facebook also. So I'm a real grassroots group, and we need each one of you. We have a big task in front of us. In November, we simply must send the 87 Tea Partiers home and bring back people who believe that government really can be on our side. Thank you very much.